Cleopatra was never the story they told. Did we really know who Cleopatra was? She wasn't just a beauty. She was a weapon, a strategist, a survivor, and her greatest betrayal wasn't from Rome, but from history itself. What if the most seductive queen in the world remembers was rewritten by the very men who feared her? This is not mythology. This is the blood-stained truth of the last pharaoh, buried beneath marble and drowned beneath Roman ink. Welcome to various eras in time. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more historical events from the past. Thank you for supporting this channel. Now let's begin this journey as we unravel this ancient story. Tonight, we sink into velvet shadows and golden sands. Forget what you've heard in textbooks. Forget the eyeliner, the lovers, the legend. She has been painted in oils on canvas, sculpted in stone, and burned into legend as a woman who used beauty like a weapon and seduction like a crown. Cleopatra. Her name echoes through history like a spell. But beneath the golden veils, the kohl-lined eyes, and the stories of Roman lovers lies something far more dangerous than beauty. She is power wrapped in intellect, legacy carved in strategy. The history of Cleopatra gave us a filtered portrait, shaped not by Egyptians, but by the pens of the very empire that destroyed her. They called her a temptress, a manipulator, a bewitching vixen who toppled men greater than her. But what if that narrative was not only false, but deliberately designed to smear the final pharaoh of Egypt? You see, Cleopatra was not Roman. She was not even fully Egyptian by blood. Born in 69 BCE in Alexandria, she descended from the Ptolemaic dynasty, Greek rulers placed on the Egyptian throne after the death of Alexander the Great. But unlike her ancestors, Cleopatra learned the language of the land. She spoke Egyptian, a bold political move that endeared her to the people. She wasn't just ruler by blood, she was ruler by choice. She inherited a kingdom on the edge of collapse. Famine gripped the Nile, Rome's influence loomed like a shadow, and the Ptolemaic court was tangled in incestuous power plays. When Cleopatra rose to power at just 18 years old, she wasn't handed the throne. She had to cleverly combat her own brother-husband, Ptolemy XIII. Yes, you read that right. A brother, a rival, a threat. And what did she do? She didn't seduce him. She outmaneuvered him. She began crafting alliances, studying Roman politics, and learning how power truly worked. Beauty? That was just a distraction. Her real weapons were strategy, language, and a mind sharper than any Roman blade. As the palace corridors buzzed with conspiracies and Roman envoys began circling like vultures, Cleopatra didn't shrink. She studied. She prepared. And soon, she would meet the man who would help her turn history upside down. Julius Caesar. The year was 48 BCE. Alexandria simmered in unrest. Cleopatra, once Egypt's queen, was now a fugitive in her own kingdom, driven from the palace by her brother Ptolemy XIII and his corrupt advisors. She wandered the edge of her empire in disguise, her throne crumbling under the weight of civil war. But Cleopatra was not idle. She knew that her fate and Egypt's now hinged on outside power. That power had arrived in the form of Julius Caesar, the most formidable general in Rome. He had come to Egypt not for Cleopatra, but to collect a debt, a financial one owed to him by the late pharaoh. But what he found instead was a power struggle ripe for intervention. And Cleopatra? She saw an opportunity. Legend says she didn't simply request an audience, she engineered a moment of theatre so memorable it would echo for millennia. Smuggled past palace guards under the cover of darkness, wrapped inside a rug or linen sack, she was unrolled at Caesar's feet, not as a supplicant, but as a queen. Eyes sharp, composure regal, strategy undeniable. This wasn't seduction. This was calculated symbolism. She presented herself as the rightful ruler of Egypt, eloquent, multilingual, politically savvy. And Caesar, ever the pragmatist, was captivated, not by beauty alone, but by ambition. Cleopatra didn't need to flirt. She spoke his language, power. What followed was a swift and brutal unraveling of her brother's regime. With Caesar's backing, she reclaimed the throne, and Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile while fleeing battle. Cleopatra emerged not just as queen, but as a survivor forged by calculative strategy. And yet, something more dangerous had begun. A child. In the years that followed, Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, a living symbol of East meeting West. To Rome, this was treason. To Egypt, it was rebirth. Their affair sent shockwaves through the Roman Senate. She traveled to Rome, not as a mistress, but as a monarch, draped in silks, crowned in gold, defying every rule that Rome held sacred. But empires rarely share power, and Cleopatra's presence in Rome would soon be eclipsed by something darker: betrayal, daggers, and Caesar's blood spilled at the Senate steps. March 15th, 44 BCE, Julius Caesar, dictator of Rome, was ambushed by men he once called friends. 23 wounds, blood staining the marble of the Senate floor, and somewhere, not far from the chaos, Cleopatra stood in silence. Rome turned on itself, and she knew the storm that was coming. She was no Roman citizen. She held no Senate seat. She was a foreign queen, and in their eyes she had done the unthinkable. Born Caesar, a son, an heir, a threat. Cleopatra fled Rome not in disgrace, but in danger. She returned to Alexandria with her son Caesarion, cloaked in mourning and calculation. She did not crumble. She reinvented herself again. Gone was the queen who once captivated Caesar in linen and perfume. In her place stood a pharaoh reborn in armor and gold, determined to secure Egypt's independence in a world where every throne was a battlefield. She named Caesarion her co-ruler, crowning him as pharaoh while he was still a child. The message was clear: Egypt would not bow, not while her blood still flowed. But Rome had not forgotten her. Two new powers rose from Caesar's ashes, Markanthony and Octavian. Caesar's heir by will, not blood. The two men, locked in a fragile alliance, split the Roman world in half. And Cleopatra? She was the jewel neither had claimed yet. Mark Antony, the Lion of Rome, eventually summoned her. Some say he demanded tribute. Others say he wanted answers. Cleopatra knew what was truly required: another performance, one worthy of myth. So she did what only Cleopatra could do. She arrived not as a widow, but as a goddess. Sailing up the Cydnus River in a golden barge, veiled in purple sails, surrounded by incense and dancers dressed as nymphs, Cleopatra presented herself as Aphrodite incarnate, not to seduce, but to ensnare a general in a game of legacy. And it worked. Mark Antony fell, not for a woman, but for a vision. Not just for Cleopatra, but for the empire she promised him. Their affair would ignite a war greater than love could contain. To the world, it was romance. To Rome, it was treason. Cleopatra and Markanthony's union was more than passionate. It was political fire. Two rulers from two ancient worlds, building a new power outside of Rome's reach. But what made their love dangerous wasn't the silk or the wine. It was a strategy. It was power redistribution, and Rome could smell it from across the sea. Together they had 3 children. Together they ruled not just Egypt, but portions of Syria, Cyprus, and parts of Greece. Cleopatra wasn't just a consort. She was Antony's equal, appearing beside him in royal decrees, leading naval campaigns, overseeing trade routes, and shaping military strategy. Her wealth fed Antony's legions. Her gold fueled his wars. And then came the dagger. In the dark, in 34 BCE, Antony stood before the people of Alexandria, crowned Cleopatra Queen of Kings, Caesarion as King of Kings, and distributed territories to their children. It wasn't a speech, it was a declaration of a rival empire, one that bypassed Rome's authority entirely. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and rising political star, exploded with fury. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a coup. Cleopatra was not a queen in love. She was a threat to Roman supremacy. Octavian began a smear campaign so effective that its echoes still shape how Cleopatra is viewed today. He called her a sorceress, a whore queen, a corrupter of Roman virtue. The Senate, manipulated and panicked, declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. Her name, not his, appeared on the decree. Because Octavian knew something the world is only now starting to realize, Cleopatra was the spine of the opposition, and in response, Cleopatra prepared for war. She wasn't just the Queen of Egypt, she was the last Pharaoh, the last living symbol of a world that defied Rome. And for that, she would be erased or destroyed. What followed was the Battle of Actium, a war at sea, a war of legacy. It was supposed to be their victory. Cleopatra and Mark Antony had gathered one of the most formidable naval forces the ancient world had ever seen. Over 500 ships, crews loyal to Egypt and the eastern provinces, sails catching wind from every corner of their fractured empire. Facing them, Octavian's forces, fewer in number but laser-focused and cunning, the site of their reckoning. The waters of Actium off the western coast of Greece, September 2nd, 31 BCE. The air was thick with incense and bloodlust, but the sea did not favor Cleopatra, nor did the gods. Whether it was miscommunication or desperation, Cleopatra's ships began to pull back mid-battle, breaking formation, slicing confusion into the heart of Antony's ranks. Historians still debate why. Some say she panicked, others say she had a secret agreement to preserve Egypt. But what's undeniable is this: when her sails vanished from the horizon, so did hope. Antony, on the other hand, seeing Cleopatra's retreat, abandoned the fight and followed. His soldiers watched in disbelief as their general turned his back on war. Why? For love or just madness? No one could say. What followed was not defeat. It was a slow unraveling. Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Alexandria, their capital now surrounded by Octavian's growing forces. Inside the palace walls, once filled with music and strategy, there was now only silence. The opulence remained, but it was haunted, gilded decay masking inevitable doom. Antony, spiraling in despair and guilt, grew erratic. Cleopatra, she grew quieter, more deliberate. She moved her most sacred possessions, gold, jewels, and scrolls, into a towering mausoleum she'd built beside the palace. Not for mourning, but for control. If they were to lose, she would ensure her treasures and legacy, and would burn before Rome ever touched them. Then came the final blow. A rumor. Whispers reached Antony's ears that Cleopatra had taken her own life, sealing herself in the mausoleum with flames and finality. Distraught and believing the love of his life was gone, Antony fell on his own sword, but Cleopatra was still alive. Her beloved was bleeding, dying. Antony was carried to her side, not in glory, but in agony. He died in her arms, not as a general, but as a man broken by a war neither of them truly won. And yet, Cleopatra remained, a queen without a king, a mother without protection, and a ruler surrounded by enemies. Her options were gone, but her final act was still to be written. Alexandria burned, chaos and despair in the wake of the unknown and fear. Word spread swiftly. Mark Antony was dead. Octavian, cold, calculating and victorious, was at the gates. Rome hadn't just won a war, it was now here, in the heart of Egypt. And Cleopatra, last of the pharaohs, stood alone on the crumbling steps of her dynasty. But she did not beg. She did not plead. She planned. Every move Cleopatra made in those final days was not desperation, it was legacy management. Octavian wanted her alive, not because he respected her power, but because he wanted to parade her through Rome in chains, a foreign trophy dragged behind his chariot like a conquered beast. And Cleopatra knew that humiliation would echo louder than her life ever could be as the last pharaoh of Egypt. She requested an audience with Octavian. Some say she tried to negotiate, offering riches, alliances, even her crown. Others believe she studied him like a scholar reads a map, searching for a crack in the marble. But Octavian was not Caesar nor Mark Antony. He had no romantic weakness. He didn't want her love. He wanted her eradicated, not just her body, but her myth. And so she vanished into her mausoleum, surrounded by golden statues of gods who had already turned their backs on Egypt. Cleopatra prepared for the final chapter. She wore her royal robes. She had herself adorned in the ceremonial jewelry of Isis. And then came the act that history would never agree upon. Was it poison smuggled in a fig basket? Was it a snake, an asp, coiled beneath the silk? Was it ritual, suicide, or both? What we know is this: Cleopatra did not give Rome her body. She gave them a corpse and a legend. By the time Octavian's men broke into the tomb, it was too late. Cleopatra lay lifeless beside her loyal handmaidens, as though sculpted in alabaster. No spectacle, no victory parade, just a silent queen who chose the hour of her own death. Octavian would go on to become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. He would take Egypt as his personal province, bleed its grain, melt its gold, and rewrite its history. But he could never control the woman who denied him his ultimate prize. Cleopatra was gone, but her story was just beginning. In the years after her death, Rome did what empires do best. It rewrote the past. Octavian, now Augustus, ensured that Cleopatra would be remembered not as a ruler or a scholar, but as a temptress, a foreign seductress, who bewitched two of Rome's greatest men, a woman who had to die to protect civilization itself. Gone was the strategist, the linguist, the queen fluent in 9 languages. Gone was the scientist, the economist, the political chess player. In her place, la femme fatale, an exotic villain. Roman poets like Horace and Virgil painted her in venom. Paintings showed her with snakes, temptation and wine, not scrolls, scholars or power. Her name became shorthand for decadence. Her story twisted to justify Rome's theft of Egypt. And it worked for centuries. In medieval Europe, she was barely mentioned. In Renaissance art, she was a symbol of vanity and lust. Hollywood would later drape her in gold and glamour, but still deny her genius. She was played by women who looked nothing like her. Her skin whitened, her identity diluted. But in truth, Cleopatra wasn't Roman. She wasn't even fully Egyptian. She was Greek by blood, Egyptian by heart, and a woman of extraordinary vision. Her reign stabilized Egypt in a time of chaos. Her economy thrived under her watch. Her people, at least until Rome's noose tightened, respected her. Today, modern historians have begun to peel back the Roman propaganda, reclaiming the real Cleopatra from beneath centuries of slander. Not a goddess, not a devil, but a ruler, brilliant and brave. And that is perhaps her greatest revenge, because though her body was lost, her mind, her voice, her myth, they survived. Cleopatra was just a woman who brought down 2 Roman generals. She didn't fall, she chose. Ancient time did not bury Cleopatra. Rome rewrote her. Scholars ignored her. Hollywood painted over her. But still she rises in fragments of papyrus and chipped statues in dusty corners of ancient libraries. History doesn't silence women like Cleopatra. It fears them. Not for their beauty, but for their minds. Not for their seduction, but for their sovereignty. Not for how they died, but because they dared to rule. Her story, like so many others, is not one of defeat. It is survival, in rebellion and defiance. And though the Nile no longer knows her name, the world still does. So perhaps she never needed a tomb, only a voice. Was Cleopatra truly the villain they wrote, or the queen they feared? Leave a comment below. Subscribe for more forgotten histories. Thank you for watching and supporting this channel.